hosting his master session with us tonight, and I want to thank Full Sail for hosting us in this awesome venue. And then Josh from Full Sail is going to come up and tell us a little bit about the school and tell us about the venue.
Well, hello. Hi. I'm Josh Mora. I am the Executive Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Full Sail University. I'm very excited to be talking with you for just a few minutes for a couple of reasons. The first, because I didn't trip coming up the stairs. Always an accomplishment for me. Number two, because even under these lights, I can see you. You guys are engaged. You guys are great looking. Excited for a nice event here you guys have tonight. And third, because you guys have really fun jobs. Or if they aren't fun to you, you make all of our entertainments fun, which is great. So we appreciate that very much. I appreciate that very much. So first of all, how many of you are at Full Sail for the first time? Almost all of you. How many of you know Full Sail or what we are? Okay, most of you. So I can skip over that part. How many of you know the building that you're in, the Fortress? Ah, now we got you. Okay, good. So this is the Fortress. This building has been open for all of 8 weeks. It's brand new. It is that's what, wow, indeed. There's more wow coming. This is the largest esports stadium on a college campus anywhere in the country. Thank you. There we go. There it is. It is all told with the lobby and the outdoor space that we have that's also part of this facility. It's 11,500 square feet. It holds, according to the fire marshal, 535 people. So when we pull all of the seating that folds into the walls and then we lay things out here, and we had a large stage, end stage here, we can get about 500. With the smaller end stage, we can do 535. Our first major external event was just last month. You may have seen that we hosted the NBA 2K Midseason Tournament that they call The Ticket, where there was $190,000 worth of prize money at stake and a automatic bid to their postseason, which was won by Warriors Gaming. Golden State Warriors NBA 2K team won the tournament. They're currently in 11th place in the standing, so it's a big deal. The top 8 teams make the playoffs, except it's the top 7 plus 1. So right now, if the season ended, team number 8 would be gone, replaced by the Warriors. Anyway, great event. Here are the other things that happen in this room. Or around this room. So first of all, with all of the screens that you see, the round at the top, side panels, this lovely screen behind us, and then I can't see if the screens are down here, they're not lit up, but there are 4 screens that go under the round here as well, north, south, east, west. All told, it's about 10 million pixels of LED screen. Yeah, again, wow, yes, that's the theme of this few minutes here. In the back, through the 3 tall doors, this room connects to our Dan Patrick School of Sportscasting. So that soundstage is not part of the 11,500 square feet, but when we hosted the NBA 2K event and when we host other events going forward, that was the studio set for the pregame, postgame, and between-game analysis, right? Shoutcasting we did here. We actually, for NBA 2K, had a center stage, so we had the 2 teams close together, talking trash, shouting green when they made the shots. It was outstanding. We have a green room back there from which Klaus and David and I emerged. We have up here, behind that wall, we have a full 2-room audio visual production room so that we were able to do a live streamcast of NBA 2K and any other events that we do here. So they're not part of the tour today, but it does not have visibility into the room. We have spider cameras all around, but it's a great facility there. We have, in our esports portfolio, we play at a varsity level on 11 different titles. So we have about 85 competitive esports athletes that fill the rosters of those 11 teams. We play intercollegiately. We have another roughly 1,000 students on campus here who participate with our club teams and our intramural teams and our 3 junior varsity teams as well. So that's a big part of our esports initiative, is having those teams, hopefully creating a curriculum. We have one in development. No guarantee that we will go forward with it, but that's nonetheless part of our positioning. And then hosting events here. Big external events. internal events, including our own teams games, other pro teams. We have a partnership with Magic Gaming, so next year when NBA 2K starts to go to home sites, we will host Magic Gaming events. We have another team that we have not yet announced the partnership for another home market. And then do all kinds of other play, so LAN play, gaming festivals, which might include music, etc. So that's what the Fortress is going to host, and why we believe we have a very interesting and unique point of differentiation when it comes to what other universities are doing in terms of their build-out with esports. Cool? Good? Questions? On with your program, then. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Joss. Wow. It's quite a place here. It's wonderful to be here with you. So, as you may have heard by this point, my name is Klaus Sommer Paulsen, and I'm going to talk to you today, you know, in sort of a fast way about something that I've been working with for a couple of years. And these are the new dimensions of narratives, new ways of working with stories that arise at this point. So it's really something that's really pivotal at this point. We stand at a monumental shift in storytelling. Let me get right back to it. I'm not going to bore you with too many of all of these bullets and stuff like that. I am a part of the TEA. I'm on the international board. Have been on the EME board as well. I work sort of in the borderland, with some of it being academic and some of it being professional development for experience design and storytelling of different kinds. I also have association with a school called Via Film and University. They're multi-platform storytelling and production, and they would die to have a room like this, I tell you that. And I am the chair of their educational committee. Other than that, I work on a couple of books at the moment, so feel free to hook up and I'll keep you updated on that. So AdventureLAB is like this design collective, experience design and storytelling collective, where our key work is done by merging integrated storytelling, experience design, and hybrid innovation. Not digital innovation, but hybrid innovation. Things that have digital components, but also physical components to them. So that's why we end up with this name, Integrated Storytelling and Experience Design Studio. And we have been working on all sorts of different things in terms of attractions and theme parks, experience centers, turning places into stories that you wouldn't expect to be story-based, experiential marketing, and brand stories and brand story experiences and so on and so forth. The thing is now that when people ask us about the TEA, so the TEA, what do we do? And people talk about theme parks. Theme parks is actually just one way of working with themed entertainment or story-based experiences. There's so much now that is going on that is not necessarily an attraction or a ride. So in our term, or in our world, we get more and more into me talking around the world about these things. In terms of workshops and masterclasses and so on, people are really interested in trying to find a way to incorporate story and brand and experience design, not at least now where so much is happening with transmedia, social media, AI, and so forth. And it's really, it's really a pleasure for me standing here and sharing some of the things that I'm really interested in and love to work with. So I feel privileged. I get to do this and talk about all of these things. And I come from Denmark. So Denmark is up there. And I came here last Friday to get away from the rain, which worked out quite good. Denmark is known for a couple of things. BIG architecture, of course, Lego, Tivoli Gardens, Hans Christian Andersen, the dashy fellow over there, a storyteller in his own right. And Wordwell, he didn't really like children, actually. So there you go. And one thing that I always get asked is, so do you guys have polar bears? And no, we don't. Sorry about that. Also, I don't understand Dutch. So there we go. Well, welcome to the campfire. This is like a little campfire gathering, as it has been going on for eons and eons, and talking about, what are the new rules? What is the culture? What is it that is changing? And I would rather that we look at this as a campfire session, meaning that I'm not just going to stand here, talk all the time, and then whatever seconds we have left we use on Q&A. There's going to be some chances for you not only to listen to the campfire, but also in terms of, turning around, speaking to others, hear their opinions, put down your own notes if you want to. Because I hope and I trust that you will have something to reflect upon when you leave this room today. If you ever want to leave, that is, because nice room, right? First and foremost, there's a new narrative that is appearing now. There's a new narrative that is arising, and that is a new narrative of the relationship between the story, the audience, and the creator. It has been established and has been the same for many, many, many years. But now it is actually changing. So on my own part, I began as a storyteller. Then I became designer, marketing dude, and all of that. And came to the point where I started to integrating these things. So what does it mean to be a story creator? Does it mean to be a writer? Well, my take on it is to be a designer and use design tools for telling stories. And in terms for you to buy into that, let's just share a few things on a premise here. These are cherry blossoms, really nice. The thing about cherry blossoms is that they only last for so long. They usually die out after 2 weeks. So wherever there are cherry blossoms, especially in the big park in Tokyo, the audience is running there to see them because they're going to go away. Now, I have only been working with digital media for 25 years or something like that. But I've seen many, many, many things come up, new technologies, new trends, new things come up and disappear again. And the thing is, that is something that is happening even faster now than it used to. Back in the day, we saw so many new kinds of software coming up that were dubbed the Photoshop killer. When this software becomes popular, nobody's going to use Photoshop anymore. The same thing now. When this and this comes up, Facebook will not be around anymore. So we see all of these technologies come up again and again. It's so easy to be infatuated. And I think that is actually what we see at this point. VR, AR, XR, and so forth and so forth. Sometimes we get so excited about the technology that we let the technology lead the way, which is dangerous, because all that is new will eventually be old. So if we work with technology, we need to do some things that apply to technologies now, but can also apply to new technologies. So it's not defined by the technology we have now. And to do that, we need to dive deep, and we need to do deep conceptual thinking. So in terms of doing this, let's just agree on a few things here. Design can be based on storytelling. We've seen that. I mean, just take a walk around the parks and you see a lot of fabulous designs that is based on particular stories. But it's also possible to do it the other way around. So storytelling can actually be based on design. Another thing is, many of us are trained in this model of storytelling. And it's like a 3-act model or a hero's journey model and so on. Very linear things. But the thing is, the story experience can be random. Now, if you start moving around in a city and do mobile storytelling, you cannot necessarily control which stops people are going to visit. They're not necessarily going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then go 2, 4, leave out 3, then go 6. And this randomness is something we can actually utilize. And it doesn't necessarily mean that things needs to become something that we cannot understand or use. It doesn't have any meaning. Let me show you an example. So this is, of course, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, if I just randomize them, it still has meaning, right? That's today. The thing is, it's not necessarily the day for me, because I come from a part of the world where we do it like that. We put the day first. So even as it's randomized, it can have different meaning, and that is because we are basically all creatures of code. We have a code, we have a series of codes that we have adapted to, that we've been learned from when we were kids. You know, a hard-learned code is, don't put your hand into the fire. And codes are different in different parts of the world. But still, the power of storytelling itself is universal. Because storytelling is really about our relations, our interactions. You know, it's about me, it's about you, it's about us, it's about them. All of these things. And that is the extremely powerful fact about why storytelling keeps on being more powerful and more relevant than even the newest, fanciest technology. Now, many people, not at least when we talk marketing, tend to do a big mistake. They want to tell a great story. They say, well, I want to tell, the greatest story is going to be 800 pages, or it's going to be, it isn't this presentation about me and us and all of that. The fact is that great stories are not about how great, flawless, and amazing you and your brand is. There's something that happens to us when we get presented with something that is just too flawless, that is just too shiny. There's nothing wrong here. Everything is awesome. We get suspicious about that. And that has been empowered even more with the rise of social media. So we notice as we want to put the audience in the role of the hero, but sometimes we need to remind ourselves, the audience is the hero of the stories that we are trying to let them experience, or the stories we want them to live. So there's a new audience story creator relationship arising based on what we see. It's not like it's not pushed by technology, it's pushed by people adapting to technology. Social media, the technology of the big social media platforms existed already for a long time. It wasn't until people really adapted to them and took them to heart, that they became extremely powerful. And the same thing goes if we have something that is lovely, lovely technology, and everybody in the room of techies think this is brilliant. If mainstream people don't buy into it, it's going to go away. We've seen that happening again and again and again. So we have a convergence of different things here. Content is important, right? The content we create, the sacred content we create, our fantastic stories. And remember all of this when we said content was king? That was nice. That was nice. A phrase that began in the 19s somewhere and then carried through. But, well, there's a new emperor now. And that's because our audience crave control. They want control, they want influence, and they're used to having it. So if we're building an experiential story-based place and we don't leave any chance for influence and control, why should the audience always think that's a good thing? Because they're used to actually being able to influence stories and movies and videos and things that they see. Also, many people trained in story telling one way or the other. Often we don't really get training in who the audience is, and what they do at that certain point, what the context is that our videos or games is going to be experienced in. And there are different levels of immersion to it, of course. There's different kinds of concentration to it. And it's something that the designer, the interaction designer, is actually very much in tune with. But even the interaction designer often thinks that the whole world is on the screen. But it's actually beyond the screen, and it's around the screen. All of the things that happens there. So the context, the framing of what we do. And then, of course, there's culture. And culture doesn't have to be something that's bound by I live in this and this region, or I live in this country, or this and this municipality. Culture is something that now can be shared across online connection points. And I can be closer to a person that lives 1,000 miles away from me, or 3,000 miles away from me, than my own neighbor. But culture has a huge influence in how we look at things. You know, even the culture of, should I be quiet at the cinema or not? You know, some things, hey, some people think this is a really good experience. We're all sitting here cheering, and other people go, I would wish they would be a bit quiet now. So there's a lot to speak about culture, but also in terms of many of the storytelling models that we trained in and we work with come from Western culture. So I had a chat with someone in Hong Kong who talked about, well, you know, this is a really strong franchise and so on. Why shouldn't it be adapted in the best possible way here as it would any other where? Because there's another tradition for storytelling. The hero storytelling is something that comes from Greek origins, while, you know, something like the Battle of the Red Cliff is a Chinese historical story, and it's not about that and that person so much as it's about what can we all do, you know, as we work together. And that, of course, is because of culture. And then here is what I thought Frozen was going to be like. And that is The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, which is actually quite a terrifying tale if you do it based on Nordic and Danish storytelling traditions. And all of this comes into convergence. All of these things, we can't have, you know, we can't ask the audience to pick everything apart and then say, this is interesting, and this is why it doesn't work, or this is why it doesn't work. There's so many strings, and the audience will only know something is out of tune here. Something is not right. And more will be added to that convergence. So now more than ever, it is important to reach out and work with people who have a different background than yourself. Not only culturally, but also how you got trained, what your professional skills are, because you need that perspective, because you can be blindsided by something that you didn't even think about. And talking about thinking, so this is a little combination of story design thinking. So design thinking is all the rage in Denmark. Is design thinking this, design thinking that. Go and build businesses and build successes based on design thinking. And this is a combination, sort of a short insight into what does this mean when we combine design thinking with storytelling. So we have models like these. Like this is different versions of the hero's journey. And the power of the hero's journey is not so much the outer journey, but that it reflects an inner journey. So why we can all abide by them, why we can all feel them, is because they follow the same steps as a personal crisis. That is why it's so powerful for creating relations. Now, speaking of culture, that is basically based on Russian fairy tales. And another thing here, like the 3-act structure, which is really a Greek model. So even though we think of them as universal models, once again, they're not necessarily universal. And we'll see new universal models come up. There's no doubt in my mind about that. There are people now working on developing these very, very exciting new ways of creating narrative structures. Let me just give you an example of a restaurant visit and how it becomes a story, and why design thinking and stories are actually so similar, and how powerful the story that is created can be. So, individual experience of going to an Italian restaurant. And we go to an Italian restaurant. There's before we go there, there's the during, there's the after, there's the atmosphere, there's the service and all of that, there's the food. And look at this, the negative to the positive, as a scale that we can climb upwards. Our goal is always to be up in the top here. Now, and this is a story of how one person sees this. Well, you don't notice, and you get introduced to it, and you go there, and something happens you're not quite happy about. Now, this is a pivotal point for what this story is going to be about. And the restaurant might have dropped your pizza on the floor. How are they going to act with it? Might have put you in a bad spot in the restaurant. And we just want to have someone take care of that, that just react to our complaints, or we don't even need to complain. And that will have a defining decision-making thing in our mind, whether we should go and tell other people if they should like this place or not. So it's actually like a 3-act model. The only difference here is we get to influence people that now are not necessarily neutral, but they're positive and they're negative. So this is the way we can think about stories as design, because they're actually so similar. So when we go in and break them up, we get all these different points and places, and 5 can be one thing and 5 can be another thing, depending on what happened. So integrated storytelling by design is actually a construction of interconnected if-then moments and emotions. So we break it into that, and typically when we do our writing, we write moments, and then we connect them afterwards. So what is all this integrated storytelling thing? Well, I'd like to introduce you to the concept of the living story. The rise, fall, and rise of the living story. So we talk about we're programmed. Our core program has been created through decades, centuries, millennia, eons. It goes back 30, 40 plus thousand years. And there's like this 35,000-year-old cave painting in France. It has a wizard and a beast and a lady. You see core elements to any story. There's Gilgamesh, the original superhero, thousands of years old as well. So when we see the popularity and the success of the wizard and the superheroes and all that, it's actually because it's a very old concept that has traveled with our culture for ages and ages and ages. Now, back then, ages ago, 30, 40,000 years ago, there would be a storyteller that would tell the story just like I stand here, and this would be around the campfire. And that storyteller would actually adapt his story to the audience. So we would go something like, well, Oog and Ork killed the mammoth with a stone. And the audience would go, oh, that's nice. And the storyteller could then say, well, Oog and Ork killed 10 mammoths with a mushroom. Oh, that's pretty good. And that would change the stories. And we've seen that throughout the lifetime of storytelling, that they begin as oral stories, and then at some point they get written down. So fast forwarding just like 35,000 years, we had the story, the mass communication, the mass media came up, and suddenly we have all these different platforms where we could distribute the story. And that evolution led to the audience actually coming more and more into the central point. So now I'm not standing here telling something to someone over there. I'm actually thinking of how can I surround the audience with this story here. And this is the rise of cross-media, integrated marketing, and transmedia as well. The thing is, though, that the story tended to be like little fragments or little copies there. We all know where we have the story that was made for television, and we put it out on some online media. Nobody sees it because it doesn't really fit the platform, and so on. But if we think instead, like not having just replicas or shorter versions in the different places, but have something that's complementary, then we start working in another way. We create story universes. And we don't think about the technology or the media first. We think about the story universe, and then we figure out what is the role of the audience within this story universe. Because then, when we talk about the relationship, then we can say, oh, so the websites should do this and this. Social media should do this and this. The park should do this and this. The video should do this and this. And I get something from each of them. But the more of them that I see, the more depth I get of the story world. Some of them will be pivotal, because they will help me understand what it's all about. Some of them will be entry points. So the thing is that we're now actually at the point where the whole idea of the story becomes something else than just, I have a story and she listens to a story. It becomes these multidimensional narratives. They transcend technology. They build through every touch point. So every little piece of the story I meet lets me know more about the universe and leaves me wanting more. I want to know more. And you can continue building on it on every angle and every dimension, because it's not just a continuation. It can be horizontal and it can be vertical in terms of how you tell your stories. And also, we allow people to influence them. The extremely powerful thing that has happened by the use of technology is that we're actually basically back at the campfire, where the audience gets to influence the story, but now it's distributed. So it's the distribution of influence itself is extremely powerful. And now that starts to change the narrative and the narrative structures, which is nothing less than revolutionary. That we're at this point where narrative structures start to adapt to this relationship. The living story has risen again. So, integrated storytelling applies and transcends technologies built through interaction, wherever, whenever the audience meets the story. It becomes like this organism, and that's why we call it the living story. There's another point to this, is that then how do you control that? And I know there's like 100,000 social media managers out there and brand managers who ask themselves that particular question. How do we control that? How do we design for this? I put out a 90-minute video, somebody re-edited it, put it online, and now it's something else. And dang it, because everybody likes his movie better than the original one, right? So how can we actually work with this and get something out of it? So let's think as designers again. What if we think of all the events in the stories as micro stories? They actually are. You don't have to read a story from bookend to get something out of it. You don't have to binge watch Stranger Things 3 to get it. So you can actually see them as elements. So let's take something like this. The hero's journey. And see, we have all these steps here. I'm not going to bore you with all the steps. But basically, they are, all of them, like a string on a line. That's a storyline that we usually work with. Now, the thing is, and we know this from park design, that we can take them and move them out in different areas. So now it becomes evident why it's important that each of these are powerful enough in themselves and has an opening and a closing in themselves. So for every time I visit something, my full experience becomes something else. It becomes more rich. Now, if we keep on with this concept and move it forward, if we think of all these micro stories as objects, I'm not going to bore you with programming language, but if we think them of objects that has attributes and can influence each other, they're capable of working together on their own, or they can work and fit together in any possible order you might think of. Now, there already is different kinds of equipment that will allow for recognition. Oh, facial recognition, mood recognition, the way you walk recognition, body language recognition, and so forth, that can tell us a lot about that person had not only been at point A, but is happy about it, or not happy about it. So that allows us to start creating stories and have like these micro stories that are not necessarily visited in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but in different orders, because what we do is we add entry and exit points to them. So this micro story over here knows where you're from. Oh, you saw that? That means you know who's the villain, and we add something to it. Furthermore, it's going to happen in this context. So we need to start thinking about stories like elements we can pick out, and we can work with them and have exit and entry and exit points to them. So this whole concept of integrated storytelling, it allows for vital moments in a modular story to be individual, interconnected microstories. They're all intriguing in themselves, but they can be connected in various ways with other things as well. And once we start thinking like that and say, okay, how can we break stories down to different modules and objects? Then we begin having the key to unlocking interactive storytelling. This is something that has been worked on for many, many years at this point, actually. And what we most see is you have the interaction, then you have the cutscene, then you have the interaction. And now we also have branching interaction, which means if you go down this path, then the story will go in this path. But it's still predefined. So have you all seen Bandersnatch? So that's a Netflix example of branching interactive video. You know, you can choose like this and this and this. If you go down that path, that will happen. If you go down that path, that will happen. It's basically no different from the old books. If you want Donald Duck to do like this and this, go to page 380. Nope. So it's basically the same principle, but there are new principles coming up that are extremely, extremely powerful because we begin to be capable of digging into the objects of the story, actually. So one thing I absolutely need to remind everybody of whenever I say this about interaction is, please remember, interaction did not arise with technology. Interaction is a human thing. And some of the best interactive media we see is capable of enhancing the connection between two humans, right? Or in some cases, what you thought was human. So let's go back to our storyline modules here again and take another dimensional cut and slice what a story is into just some of the circles, not all of the circles that it consists of. So a story has a universe. It defines the rules. It defines the genre. It defines what is possible. Time travel in Friends is weird. Time travel in Doctor Who is not so weird. So there's a stage, which can be a world or a room, or however you want to do it, really. That is where the action takes place right now. You have objects in that, and if you talk about gaming, then you have different things here that becomes really interesting and relevant, because that object might be a gun, and you might need that gun, right? And then you have characters and pets and other things. So this is not like the full list of what is in a narrative structure, but it's just some of the key things here. Now we put the audience in the middle there. And it's what they experience with these different things out here. And once we start doing this, then we can say, okay, so the audience should interact with objects, or the audience should interact with characters. So we start to have these pinpoints we can use in the design, actually. And at the same time, we realize that there are different storylines that go through this. We might have a meta storyline. If this is a World War II scenario, we have a meta storyline from 39 to 45. And we don't want anything to change with that. And then we have a multitude of storylines that come through here. Some of those storylines we might not even be able to define ourselves, because that may be the storyline of what people actually experience on their multitude of combinations of interactions with objects and characters in there. And for the audience in the middle, her or his story becomes the main story, not what we defined as the meta story. So once we start thinking like this, then we can define and activate these different points of interaction and influence, and we can build these multi-narrative structures. And that means we have some direction. And once we start thinking like this, So I can only speak to how we work. We go back and forth between design and story all the time because the design then influences the story, and the story then influences the design, and finally you come to an entity, a hybrid entity that works. But it's just, it enables so many things rather than saying, this is the story, do something experiential and interactive with it. Because it's actually constructed as a design from the very beginning. And one of the reasons for doing that is because what all of this has brought along is a very monumental change in the role of the audience. So often when people ask, so who's your audience? They start talking about segmentations and groupings and things like that. But it's much more nuanced than that. And if I was to talk about that, we're going to stick here around here for 2 days. But there's so many other things in terms of what is the role of the audience? Once they are allowed to be activated. So we know that the audience is the star. But what if they're also the co-creator? What if they're also, writing the stories beside us? Let me show you an example of a little project, a Christmas calendar for kids. Although this Christmas calendar was not written for kids, it was written by kids. So what was done was the premise, that evil dude over there had taken away Santa Claus. And then the full framework was built for kids actually to write the story. And it ended up being their story that was the one that was published online, an interactive multimedia book. And especially a 14-year-old girl did a really, really good job of doing this. So the creative team worked on rather wrapping up 1 week, getting another week ready, and then saying, what will happen next? Almost like in the old newsreels, right? Will they find the mad professor? Will he ever end his sadness as a reindeer? And things like that. Just a little pointers, but then leave it to the kids to write it, really, and see what happens. So that's one of the things when working with these things. It might not be able to define the final form from the beginning. So I know there's a lot of good advice in storytelling about start with the ending, but you might be in a situation where you don't really know what the ending is and what it will be. So if we look at all of this again and see, okay, we have these different ways, different points where we can have the audience interact, universe, stage, objects, and so on. Now let me just show you some of the ways that the role of the audience can be changed. And it's by looking at what they're supposed to do. What is their role? So there's this classical thing, observation. The audience does not influence the storyline. And ever since I have been involved with anything with digital media, this discussion has always been there. Should everything be interactive? And of course, we need to just lean back and watch that new episode of Stranger Things 3, right? And so the modality changes. And this is another point, is that you can't define the audience as one fixed thing. It can change, and the audience can even change through the experience of your own story world. Then we have the exploration. The audience gets to explore the story world. We go into a themed environment, and we look and we say, oh, this is just like being on this and this planet or in this universe, and was that Han Solo over there? So you get to explore it, and it's actually also in game structure something that's really, really powerful. Tomb Raider, back in the day, in the words of the creators of Tomb Raider, they said one of the reasons why it succeeded so much was not necessarily because Lara Croft ran around with 2 guns, but it let you explore all parts of the world. So a lot of the game was actually running around in these different scenarios. And now, as we have the open world games, it's not interaction all the time. You get to explore the world. Red Dead Redemption, and so on and so on. Then there's the interaction. The audience interact with story elements, but can't really influence the storyline itself, right? We're at cutscenes, we're at pre-shows, we're at pickup joints, where you have some things that you can interact with, but the story will remain the same. And then something begins to happen. Influence. Now the audience starts to be able to influence some of the elements. It might be through interaction with a character. It might be actually pushing something off a cliff that changes the story very much. It actually may be pushing the hero into the volcano and see what happens. And then we start breaking ground on the co-creation. The audience is involved in creating the storyline. EVE Online, there was a comic that came out of EVE Online that was based only on the observations of what the players were actually doing. There's no writer, there's no author, it's just gamers and some who had set up this scheme to take over parts of the universe. It became a comic, actually. And then the creation. The audience becomes the creator. We provide the framework. We're no longer in control of the story. We might take keep it a little under control though, and have some observation. But basically, we provide a framework for the audience to become creators themselves. And we're already down that path. So when I go out in a living space, when I go out in an experience space, and I'm already, this is the kind of power I have in other kinds of story-based media. And then I get fixated. I can't do anything. I can't influence anything. I don't know if the audience is going to, keep up with that. There's an old ride in Tivoli Gardens. And this is a peculiar example, but I was told by the head designer there, so this is called the flying carpet. It's not the most interactive, intriguing ride, or so it wasn't. Because audiences voiced their opinion about this ride by actually spitting on the statues, small statues. So one of the most feared and dreaded jobs at Tivoli Gardens was cleaning that ride. Then they put some interactivity in there, just shooting stuff, something that was relevant still, and people stopped, right? So it's like this discontent expression we can see from the audience can be quite powerful. But you just look at how they evolve, look at how they can do different things. And now, I would actually, since I know we have more microphones here, I would actually like to ask you, how much control do you yourself, want to give away to the audience? How much control are you prepared to give away? If any of you have any thoughts on this, we have microphones, and I'd love to hear it. Yep, Mike, over here. There we go.
Hello, Patrick here. For me, when I see giving audience control, I see a lot of dollar signs added to that. So, not a lot. I guess and for theme parks, it can be very difficult and challenging.
That is certainly something to consider, yes. Anyone else? You want to give all the control away right behind you?
I'm Ethan. I am a horror film producer, so I like to not give my audience control because I know they like control. So I like to take that away from them and make it different.
Yep. And there's a You got it there, and there's someone over there afterwards.
Hi, my name is Trevor. I'm a game design student, and I believe within my program, the customers that pay for the game and play it should have a majority of the control, because they're paying for a product and they're believing that this product will be what we tell them it is. And so if they buy it, get it, and don't have what we told them and that would be in it, then they don't have that control over it. They're going to voice their opinions, and that's going to be bad. So I believe that they should have a majority of the control.
And you actually voice something there where sometimes as a game designer, you would have people think they have control and they think they do, and when they find out they don't, the backlash is just, wow. I wouldn't like to handle that. We had someone over here first, yep. Right there.
Yeah, in the realm of theme parks, it's always tough, but control is really important. It always comes down to a little thing of like keeping the guest empowered. Like even if it's having a good experience, you don't want them running over to guest experience or your guest services, because that means that they're not in control and they need to get back into that. Bringing that kind of infrastructure into your technology that's maybe running the park, unbelievably influential. The more control we can give the audience within the framework of a game, it's like Breath of the Wild, Zelda. Everyone thinks, I can do anything. Well, no, you can't. You can only do whatever's given to you within that framework. A theme park can be the same thing. It's like Pandora, I can do anything. I can fly on a Banshee if I wanted. No, you can only fly on a Banshee, but you think you can do anything because we've told you can fly on a Banshee.
Good point. It's like you can't levitate in Red Dead Redemption, right? So. Just over back here.
Hi, my name is Sam. I worked in kind of an adjacent industry. I've been in mostly museums, but we wrote a show, and the show kind of progressed almost like Whose Line Is It Anyway? If you've ever seen Scenes from a Hat, where they pick up a thing, and so we decided to try doing the show where the audience before the show would write anything, and then throughout the show we would pick up a piece of paper and then use whatever that piece of paper said to influence the story. But ultimately, it would have never been possible if the performers couldn't improv to make it work. So it was like almost the illusion of control, where they are seeing that they have a part in this and they can influence the story, but really most of the control lies with the performers or with the ultimate storyline. I guess I'd call it the illusion of control.
Absolutely. It's like when you provide guidelines for a cast member, but not a script, and the cast member can take it away. So there was over here, over there first. I got people watching out for you guys, so nobody gets forgotten.
No, I appreciate it. Having a theatrical and, I guess, music producing background, within the past 5 years, I've seen a lot of, I guess, the auditing experience die down, where in most concert experiences, you have as much control over how you're acting as an audience member as you can imagine, right? But recently, within the whole heyday of video games, surge in themed entertainment, I've seen audience members actually interact less because they have infinite possibilities, but there's no prompt. So they don't do anything.
So why do you think they're limiting themselves?
That's not something that I've unlocked yet.
Wow. Yep. Over here, blue shirt.
Hi there. Oh, hello? Yep, that's working. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Alex. And, I think what's really interesting about the question of the amount of control you give your audience is also what is the ripple effect of the amount of control you give your audience? Because let's say you're in a themed environment and you have an audience member who's able to blow something up. Well, if you give everybody ultimate control, that affects how much control the next guy has. So you have to be able to reset it. You have to ask, how am I going to reset that? And how much is that going to affect the person who sees it get reset before they get to control it? So this question works really well as a jumping off point for about 100 other questions.
Absolutely. And if anyone has the final question for that, please send me an email.
Hello, I'm Mia. I am currently a interactive design and theme entertainment student at SCAD. And to answer the question, I think essentially like control is, the limit of control is very essential to making or breaking the interactivity of the medium. So if you have a control within the storyline or a storytelling, it could actually immerse the audience more, even if it is limited. And you know, like someone already stated, that is the illusion of control or the lack thereof. As long as there is some kind of, you know, as long as it doesn't break the immersion or break the storyline, that control is. The audience doesn't really care about the limitation of control as long as they get to influence the end of that story that you're trying to tell.
Yep. One last, then we continue. There's a Mark. Oh, there. Okay.
The creator needs to establish their own limits within that framework, though, because there's a fairly recent example of Reddit commenters were guessing theories on Westworld, and they guessed a upcoming twist, and the showrunners saw that and were like, oh crap, now I need to change it. And they literally went and they had to do a reshoot because they felt that they had lost this control and that because people had guessed whatever their mystery box. That's a dangerous precedent to set to really start going that far. And I mean, that's also dependent on the medium, but there has to be a limit, or at least the creators have to almost establish their own limits there. What are they willing to give up? What are they willing to change? And what is a bedrock?
And I think that's a fine summing up point in terms of it's really about where you as a creator want to make your stance, right? Like what kind of control do you want to have? And if you're going to listen to the audience, especially the social media audience, you can do retakes forever. And you know, somebody somewhere in the world will have figured out your plot. You know, nobody's that genius, sorry, but that's how it goes. Now, the thing about thinking of all these modalities is that integrated storytelling, you know, as we have all the modules and we have all the different places, and I'll come back with some questions to you later, and Q&A even, but we can enable and we can adapt to different audience roles and modalities because we have these different modules that we can work with. We have these different objects that we can work with. And how should people influence them? Not just throwing it all out there and then say, go do something with it, but you actually have a design approach to it. So let me just take you down the rabbit hole for a bit here. This is just a logline version of an adventure, a fairy tale. Alice in Wonderland. Alice follows a white rabbit down a rabbit hole. She arrives in Wonderland, a place populated by strange creatures like the Cheshire Cat. Her adventures lead her to a garden where servants are painting roses red to appease the Queen of Hearts. Alice is called upon to testify against a tough thief. And when she admits she knows nothing about the crime, the Queen orders her execution. Alice wakes up at the last minute to realize this was all a dream. Now, Alice in Wonderland has been used metaphorically many times. And of course, you know, red pill, blue pill, matrix, and so on. As of choosing of going into the adventurous world or not. Now, if we break this up into micro stories, it's actually 4 different pieces here that each have their own potential to be something that's really really has its own depth to it. And you might have something that you call an entry point and an exit point, but then you can start adding things here. So rather than just continuing your story horizontally, and by that I mean, you add a prequel or a sequel or something else to it, you can actually start diving down in the middle of the story and build on it vertically. So have something else happen in there. And there has actually been a lot of good examples of people having fun with this Alice in Wonderland thing. What else could have happened there? Now, if we look at how we can influence the story about Alice, so it's a question of observation, it's a question of interaction, it's a question of influence, co-creation, or even creation, but right now we have like a defined storyline. What I'd like you to do with this is just, 2 or 3 people just whomever you have just around you. Just use a few minutes and work with this Alice in Wonderland thing. She goes down a rabbit hole and all that happens and she comes out again. It was a dream. And discuss among yourself how changing the role of the audience could change the story about Alice. I'm just going to do it for a few minutes, really. But it's just to try and push it a bit. So I suggest that you choose one, 2 or 3, 4 people, doesn't really matter, just very few people, and choose one of these. Is it exploration, interaction, influence, co-creation, or even creation? And how could that influence the Alice in Wonderland story? I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to try that out. Okay? All good? Yep, here we go. Okay, I'm going to be the one who breaks off the fun here. But isn't it amazing what can change if you just change a little attribute like what is the role of the audience, right? So just a quick raise of hands. How many of you saw something new, perhaps surprising, emerging from your talk? Raise of hand. Yep. Well, there's something. Brilliant. I would suggest, take a snapshot of that or something, keep in mind, or if you have your notes, and try to do it with one of the stories you work on or you love or you like, and try and challenge that. Do it with your friend or with your colleague or whomever, do it with yourself. It's fine, but try and challenge that and see how it can actually change the story, because that will start making you think how you might want to rethink how you do your stories from the beginning. Okay? Brilliant. Okay, so let's turn off the light and move a bit further down the rabbit hole. So I promised you guys that that some of these ways of thinking about stories is also what will help a story creator, story designer, storyteller, whatever you call it, find his or her place in the world of AI, which is something that is happening very much right now. And some of the aspects that we see is the rise of responsive characters, not only like Siri that obeys a command or answers a request, but characters that will actually respond to how you behave, and intelligent storylines that will actually adapt to what you do. So, thinking of all of this again, we have different places that where we can turn the switch. And let me just show you how much changing a single attribute can change in the story. So we have a very straightforward story here. The alien encounter. Status, hero. This is mock-up programming language, of course. But if the alien attacks and you have a weapon, then you kill the alien, you become the hero, right? We change just one little thing and say, we just take out the weapon. We just take out an object. If the alien attacks and you do not have a weapon, you're not a hero, you become a casualty. Get killed by the alien. Then we change another little thing in the storyline. We just take out one element. The alien does not attack, but you choose to kill it. So you become the villain rather than the hero. And these small twists of attributes is something that we're going to see mean a lot in terms of story experience. Not only choose the dark side and the light side, but really in fully nuanced characters with flaws that can be both good and bad and so on. Now, another attribute here is, of course, that of emotion. And I can't help bringing these guys because I love this movie. So these are not like the full list of emotions, but there's certainly some of them. Disgust, fear, joy, sadness, anger. And let's just try a little thing here where you get to stand up for a second and do an outburst. So let's see if we have all of these emotions here. And I just want you to mix your own character, like a cocktail. I'm here on vacation, after all. Mix your own character as you look at them and say, oh, it's going to be 70% of that. It's going to be 20% of that and 10% of that, right? So it might be 70% fear, 20% sadness, 10% anger, or something else. Give it some thought. And this is going to be a memory exercise as well, because you're going to recall it in just a half a minute. So make your own character and remember what it is, right? Write it down if you want to. You all mixed a character? Yep. Now what I want you to do is to act out in character, the character you just mixed, to a picture. You know, stand up or sit down, but react to it in character. Are you ready? Yep. Spotlight's on. So you got your character in your head and in your heart, and here we go. Well, they love dogs, I said. You know, I go over here, they love dogs. So, okay. So we had no standing characters. Okay, you remember your character? You have your notes or your memory? Okay, try and remix it. So what was 70% before? Haha, right? What was 70% before is now 10%. What was 10% is now 70%. 20% is the same thing, right? So now you have a character that is constructed with different attributes of emotion. So you got it? You got your remixed character, or as they call it, the 2 a.m. bar person. How would your character react to, and this time you're perfectly fine to stand up. There's high ceiling and everything. So, how would your character react to this? Give him a hand. Awesome. So the thing is that character, it doesn't matter if it's a brand or it's a person or whatever it is. Character is defined by behavior and choices in key moments. If we change the attributes, we can turn down the lights again, that's okay. If we change the attribute of a character, it will react differently. Now that switch you see there, now I call it the 2 a.m. bar person, but it's actually, we're not, balanced in the same way all the time. And that is something that we will see in AI. Characters being able to respond to us and change to us in terms of how we act. Not all the time, but in the moment. Because we're basically on the threshold to AI storytelling. So serious research being done now, projects are being done. Some great guys in the UK doing some work. And some years ago, somebody said, well, you can't teach AI to be creative. And of course, a lot of programmers and developers took that as a challenge. So, yep. So I'm just going to show you something. So this is a story, right? Here it is. That's a story. So there's the story, there's the media, there's the context. Audience develops as they move through the stories, even in a 3-act model. The story itself, which is called the IASP, develops as the audience moves through it, so it's influential, what's going on here. We have some inactive elements, some interactive elements. Inactive elements to anchor the story, interactive to give some interaction to it, and the model with the circles enable us to choose which are which. And then all of these influences each other as we move forward here, and we can choose to have an inactive end, which is basically the branching video, but the story world itself becomes so much richer. And let me just show you, if we can get some sound on this. Let me just show you a few examples of what happens when characters in the story itself starts adapting and based on what your interactions is. Well, It's a drill, people. Okay, here we go.
I'm here at the BBC Blue Room at Media City, where I'm about to test drive a driverless taxi. Welcome to the year 2035. This is so exciting. Hold on, we're setting off.
Is that fun?
Yes.
Cool.
You have been invited to take part in a referendum.
Here we are in your perfect future.
Wow.
Hope you've enjoyed the journey.
You're not a spy.
My dear, the spy likes a drink. As you know, I am teetotal. And besides, a spy is the last person to tell you they are a spy.
Before proceedings begin, I would like to be the first person to congratulate the newly appointed Prime Minister on their promotion.
Wow.
Now, Prime Minister, the country's fate is in your hands. We are relying on you.
So these are like the first steps we see into a world where speak from the characters is based on something called natural language processing, which is a recognition of, if you have a conversation with someone, you will do recall in that conversation. If someone is not polite to you, you will react by being impolite. And some of this work is also with characters to try to trick you and use what they learn about you and try to trick you like the suspect. So we see a lot of really, really interesting things coming up. And once again, having something like an integrated storytelling framework, it allows for us to have a framework for individual story experiences that are based on this intelligent behavior and pattern recognition. Because basically, it's possible to learn, so the audience react like this to this and like this to this. Okay, then we have a pattern now. I don't need no profile. I just need to see you take 3 steps and then have an idea about where you most likely would like to go. So just imagine how that's going to be in terms of nonlinear museum exhibitions and experiences and attractions. It raises some questions, of course, such as, will intelligent story modules be the birth of smart stories? There's a great guy called Guy Gattney, who is on one of the first research projects in Europe on AI storytelling. And he talks about something called stories that learn, which is basically stories as AI. Will conscious, even self-conscious code create a new story creation culture? Like we talked about, we have some models that are adapted from Greek and Russian and so on, ways of constructing stories. Will we see a completely new construct? Will we see new storytelling models? Some of them might even be created by AI itself. Raises another question. Culture is not defined by borders. Harry Potter culture don't have to be in one country or the other to really live that. Does it have to be defined by humanity? Or is it somewhere of us working together with the technology to achieve the next step? Just some of these questions, and questions I think that we need to ask ourselves. as creative designers and storytellers and game designers and so on. How can we, how will this world be? And I'm not even going into deep fake and all of that, but there is a lot coming up. We can use it to our advantage, and it can create extremely popular, extremely fantastic ways of immersing people into their own storyline. But the key question is really, what is the future role of the creators and designers of stories? And it doesn't really matter if you've been 3 months on campus or 30 years in the industry you represent. You need to ask yourself this as a creative director. You need to ask yourself this in terms of your team. So what is that future role? But I also say, so I talk about design and models and AI and so on, and there really is an X factor to all of this. There really is. And that is the imagination and creativity of people who doesn't necessarily say, oh, we can't use technology, but find new ways of integrating technology. I think that combination of the human brain and technology is what will create something that is absolutely stunning, amazing, and I'm looking forward to seeing it actually. See some of it rising now, but just imagine where we are 5 or 6 years down the line, or 10 years down the line. So before we move on to Q&A, we're nearing that time. I want you to just take 2 minutes to yourself. You have something to put notes down on. This will be a good time to have it. And just put this down as a reminder. This is something we always say. When I get back home, I'm going to put down those key takeaways, right? Spend a couple of minutes, put this down for yourself. I hope you don't get to go home with blank papers. Okay, I hope I don't cut off anyone short here. Before we go to Q&A, I just say, let your journey into these new narrative dimensions begin, Take what you can use of this, add to it. Send me an email where you think, you know what, you thought that, but this is much smarter. I'd love to hear it. So that's really let your journey begin. And let the questions begin. Yep, need a mic over here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. One of the things I've always struggled with a little bit in sort of more multiple interactive stories is the risk of missing out on something. And the idea of when there's 10 choices, you only choose 3 or only choose 4, what might have been, or how you navigate, I guess, the risk of not maybe having the story you intended to tell, or missing out on something, something like Sleep No More, for example, a few years ago in New York. If you saw one thing, you might not see the other. I'm wondering, I guess, how you might feel about that, about not ever being able to see every option, and as well as maybe they don't come up with the optimal story you wanted, but conversely, maybe it's something better than you expected.
So in shorter story terms, of course, and such as some of the new interactive rides, they're actually capitalizing on the fear of missing out. So you need to come back because you haven't seen stage 5 or stage 3, which is very, very powerful. I think it's about having these sections of in and out where people feel enriched and satisfied. And the best thing we can do is to have people say, I really enjoyed that. I want to come back for more, right? And of course, but that goes back to this micro story structure again, that each microstructure should not be an excuse for a story, but actually be rich and powerful and interesting in itself. And also because I think we're going to see, many people who trained in video will hear you need to have an end. We're going to see, I think, stories that does not end. They live on. And at that point, it's even more important with the modules. You can dive in and dive out. And, oh, this bubble was great. I want to jump in and have another bubble.
Thank you.
And the back?
Hi, I'm Chris.
Hi.
One of the problems with VR storytelling was that we can't really control where the audience is looking, or like in a cinematic film, we can control what the frame is. And if they want to walk around, we really can't control that in VR. I was wondering if you had any insight on how to tell stories in VR and how we can use what you've been kind of telling us about.
I love that question. And I'll tell you why. I was invited to a VR gathering with a lot of brilliant film and video people around. And their approach to VR was very much 360. Which is not really immersive beyond the screen thinking. It's just, oh, I can see all the way around me. That's nice. And I was wondering why they hadn't invited spatial storytellers to that seminar or that conference. Because they needed to talk to architects. They needed to talk to spatial designers. Because there's a whole toolbox of how you can navigate people. I mean, you can go to one of the theme parks here and see more examples of how to direct people in one direction or the other than, you'll need that. You'll need that. You can see architects. And in game design, even like having a pillar of light showing as a thing, okay, I need to go there eventually. You can have the same thing. So it's like you need spatial designers because you need spatial storytelling in VR. To help navigate, but also to tell the story without word that is there. Yes? Looks like magic from up here when the mic comes out. It just comes out of the dark.
Hello again. Earlier, and a couple times, you've said storytelling affecting the design and the design affecting the storytelling. Can you just dive into that concept a little bit and what that means? I have an opinion about that means, but what does that mean to you?
So how it's a mutual base, really. So what that means to me is, so having worked with different kinds of branding and theme and so on experiences, there's often a very good set way of doing things. Like, okay, we have the storyline, we have all that, we'll make it into themes, and we're gonna build an attraction based on that. And then something happens that doesn't really fit with the story. And the story loses out. And we see that a lot of times, actually, when there's not a big established IP or franchise. So that is why this hybrid thinking of design and story just keeps on adding value to both of the things. So in one point, you're talking about what the story is, and all the powers of great stories and all the elements of great stories. And then you're talking about, well, how do we design something in that story? So you might start somewhere in between the two to make something that really gets to a higher, extreme higher level than where one falls out of the other. I mean, it's like going to an IAPA, right? There's the IAPA Expo. There's a lot of brilliant things, a lot of good things, a lot of brilliant companies there. But there are also a lot of people presenting their wares and saying, oh, but this is storytelling. And then, no, it's just superficial design. It's not really in-depth storytelling. So I think we need to connect those things, and that's why I think it's important to be able to switch your brain back and forth between story and design. I hope that makes sense. Yep, another one over here.
Earlier you said that those linear stories, mainly if you split it up, you could actually tell a story in a different order. I've actually seen a couple different stories where it switches from main character to main character, but none of the main characters are actually important in the end, since they were just giving their point of view, and the timeline in which it was shown was also not in order. But they always ended in a ending where you actually had to think for yourself, what was all this and why was it in this order and why was it shown? Does that count towards what you were talking to earlier?
Well, it certainly it certainly is something where you can see it makes sense the more of these pieces as you come in. And this is an example where you have an entry and an exit point, a set entry and an exit point. So in the end, that'll make meaning to wrap everything up. Now, the thing I think we're going to see are these parallel storylines where the character is not necessarily glued to the narrative structure. So you can have something that is evolving in one way, and you have characters like the AI characters that actually adds multiple levels to it. So it's like different levels at the same time going on. Yep. In the back.
You said it just like comes to you. Wow. Hi, I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but do you have any kind of like question that you repetitively use or a mantra that allows you to keep focus on why you're using a technology and something so that you don't just get to the point of using the technology for technology's sake? I guess what brought that up to me was the AI where the people were interacting with the AI, and I thought that looks, why not just a human? And I'm sure there's a reason there, but do you have a thing you say or a question?
Well, thank you. So one of the things that there's there with AI compared to, like, let's say, a cast member is with the AI character, the individual experience becomes even more so, because the character will react to how you actually act. So it can add a lot of things to that. But I think the thing is always to step back. So I can only share how we work with experiential narratives. So as you know, when you work with attractions, you have an experiential narrative, you have a technological narrative, and so on and so on. That is basically your script for what should go on. So we work with something we call a metaphorical narrative, where everything we do, we explain in metaphors. And then afterwards, we figure out how can we put this metaphor to life? Should it be technology or shouldn't it be technology?
Thank you.
Any last takers? Down here in the back.
So I might have been misunderstanding before, but it seemed like you were creating the types of audiences as like almost evolution from like observation all the way to creation. But are there situations or are there, I guess, paradigms where you feel like there are certain levels or certain types of audience members that you need to create models to engage all of them with a set storyline? And I guess, how would you engage that?
So basically, I'd engage that as an interaction designer and work with dynamic archetypes, because I might want to change that role throughout the story itself. So I'm not just the same thing all the time, but then saying, okay, this is like the dynamic character that the audience actually is. So that would be one way. And it is an evolution. But remember that even within a story, the role changes. I think that's important to say, because it's like even in an action game, right? You can't have action all the time. It's like when people go to the zoo, they don't spend most time with the animals, you know. Needs to be dwelling spaces regardless of what kind of space we're talking about. People need to be able to lean back and relax as well.
Thank you.
Yep. There's one. You're going to be the last one, and I'm not going to keep you here. We're 7 minutes over time.
Hi. Before you said that the audience is the hero and that we tell the bigger story behind to divide into micro stories. But you think that this can be applied to the client and seller relationship without affect and giving too much power to the client? In a way, for example, and make the client the hero of the bigger story that we are telling without trying to give too much power and make the relationship like being not destroyed but weaker?
I think when you're if you're talking a business-to-business relationship and had a client purpose, then if you provide creative services, if you provide business services, then your job is to make the client the hero. Absolutely. Your role is to be the mentor and the guardian and the helper on the side. You know, you get to go to the award shows, that's it. So.
Thank you.
Well, then it's my time to say thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this extremely much. I got one more question to ask you. Please go in and fill out this form of what you thought about today, because if not, I'm going to get my butt kicked when I get back. So that I would really appreciate if you do that. Just take 5 minutes, and then you get to do comments and stars and whatever. So thank you so very much for having me here today. It's been an extreme pleasure to be here and the company with you. So thank you.